Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Smith, and I'm a science communicator at Wisconsin Sea Grant. Welcome to tonight's Lake Talk. Tonight, we're focusing on the Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast National Marine Sanctuary, which was officially designated in 2021. A lot of effort went into making that happen, as our speaker tonight can tell you. The sanctuary is located in Wisconsin waters of Lake Michigan along Ozaukee, Sheboygan, Manitowoc, and Kewaunee counties. It's one of only 15 national marine sanctuaries in the US and only the second one designated in freshwater, so that's an amazing development. Shipwrecks can tell us a lot about Great Lakes history and science. And Wisconsin has the most individually listed shipwrecks of any state on the National Register of Historic Places. So there's a lot to learn about. Our speaker tonight is Russ Green. He'll give us an overview of the new sanctuary and a look at some projects going on both on and off the water. Before we get going into that, I have just a few details. We have 1 hour, and that includes time for your questions. You can go ahead and put your questions at any time in the chat box at the bottom of your screen here on Zoom. Also, this is being recorded in case you want to watch it again later or share it with someone. We'll post it to our YouTube channel for Wisconsin Sea Grant in the near future. I also wanted to say a brief word about Wisconsin Sea Grant. If you're not familiar with us already, we're based at UW-Madison, and we also have field offices with staff in various places around the state, including Manitowoc, Green Bay, Milwaukee, Superior, and Kenosha County. We're part of a national network of 34 Sea Grant programs working on issues related to coastal and marine science. Now I want to tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight, Russ Green. Russ Green has worked in Great Lakes conservation for 2 decades, first as an underwater archaeologist for the state of Wisconsin, and later as deputy superintendent at the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary in Alpena, Michigan. He holds a graduate degree in maritime archaeology from East Carolina University. Russ has worked on maritime archaeology projects in Bermuda, Micronesia, Japan, and along both coasts here in the US, including technical diving expeditions to the USS Monitor, an ironclad warship from the Civil War that lies in 240 feet of water off of North Carolina. Green also has a connection to Sea Grant since he was appointed by the UW-Madison Chancellor to our advisory council in 2021. So we appreciate his service in that capacity. I know everyone who tuned in is eager to hear from Russ and learn about the sanctuary. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to him. So take it away, Russ.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that introduction. Very kind, great to be with all of you tonight and have an opportunity to share a little bit about the National Marine Sanctuary that was just established, as Jennifer said, here in Wisconsin this past summer. So I've got a little bit of background of how we got here, a little bit of history, not a ton. There's some great Sea Grant talks that have talked about some of the shipwrecks in the Marine Sanctuary. I've got a little bit of that, but then also share some of the projects that we're working on right now to give you a sense of what we're up to and what we hope to accomplish in the future. The Marine Sanctuary is, as Jennifer said, it's the 15th one in a network of marine protected areas, which is known as the National Marine Sanctuary System. And it's a pretty fantastic system. You can think of it partly as underwater parks. These are places where we really encourage people to go and to visit. And we are very much about compatible use, whether it's coral reefs in the Florida Keys or shipwrecks here in the Great Lakes or kelp forest or humpback whales. We want people to be interacting with these places so that they value them. And when people value these really incredible places, they'll want to protect them. They're also very research-based. And so the management decisions we make and the decisions we make along the way and in managing a marine sanctuary are very much based in science. We have very active research programs, and those are great attractors for different partners to come work in these places. Education is a huge part of what we do. And again, it's sort of part and parcel with getting people to go into the water and visit these places. Not everybody can do that. So education from K through 12 into higher education, informal learning is another way that we really accomplish research protection, because again, people will protect what they understand and what they love. And then finally, and I'll share tidbits of this as we go through the talk, but they're very community based. Each one of these, of course, is adjacent to a community somewhere in the US or out into the Pacific. And so in the case of Wisconsin, we were actually nominated as a marine sanctuary by communities along the lake shore and the state of Wisconsin. And so this is part and parcel with this particular marine sanctuary, but all of the marine sanctuaries are very much engaged with their communities as we manage these places going forward. And again, I'll share some examples of that as we go on. In the Great Lakes, there's two national marine sanctuaries, the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, which is in Lake Huron, our new sanctuary here in Wisconsin. And then there's a third sanctuary in designation, in the process of becoming a marine sanctuary out in Lake Ontario. And I share this map with you for a couple of reasons. One is to just show that I should say all of these places are focused on cultural resources, primarily shipwrecks. That's what tends to survive in these places. But we know that there's thousands of years of history in each of these places. And so it's really about this entire span of history. We protect the narrow band of resources, cultural resources. That's kind of our lane. However, these places bring attention to the Great Lakes. All of these places can and do and will, in the case of Lake Ontario, work much broader, work outside the boundaries of archaeology to promote conservation much broader, to meet the challenges in the Great Lakes. So it's good news that there are marine sanctuaries in the Great Lakes. There's all kinds of other programs working in local and state and federal programs. And so it's exciting to be part of that the puzzle that is, meeting some of the challenges in the Great Lakes. And of course, Sea Grant and the Sea Grant system is a great example of that. So we're thrilled to just be part of that equation to help conservation move forward in the Great Lakes. I'm going to back up for one other second. The other cool thing about this map is it gets us a little bit closer down the history path. When you look at the Great Lakes, they're the dominant feature in North America. You really can think of them as a water highway throughout time for millennia. They've been used for travel and subsistence and exploration. Nations have fought over the Great Lakes. And into the 19th century and 20th century, they really were the economic engine for North America. So our development as a country is really tied to this water highway that is the Great Lakes. And we have kind of a nerdy expression in history and archaeology, which is, we're separated by land, but connected by water. And that truly is the story of the Great Lakes. And again, I'll get into some examples of this. One really interesting fact is that Duluth, Minnesota is one of the top 25 ports in the United States. It sees about 900 ships a year, but it's over 2,000 miles from the eastern seaboard. So that gives you a sense of today, the enormous amount of commerce that's supported on the Great Lakes. And that story resonates right back through time. So that's a key piece of why shipwrecks are here and why this history is important. In Wisconsin, in the case of this sanctuary, as I mentioned, it began with a community-based nomination. And this was the first one in the sanctuary system to be move into designation after this kind of a nomination. This was a new process created in 2014. And so the nominators, the cities of Port Washington and Two Rivers, Manitowoc, Sheboygan, and the state of Michigan, and lots of supporters that came on board, really articulated their vision of why they wanted to protect these places. As you may know, the state of Wisconsin has an incredible underwater archaeology program, not a problem. They have an amazing opportunity, and that's housed in the Wisconsin Historical Society. So there's an amazing 30-year legacy of protecting these places. And so the idea was to build on that and to see other ways that we could leverage these incredible resources for tourism, recreation. We could learn more about them. A marine sanctuary could attract more partners to research in the sanctuary. And you can read the snippet from the nomination there, but that really captures this comprehensive vision that the nominators had for a marine sanctuary. And it turns out that the pieces that they're really looking for are really the strong elements of how we protect resources in the National Marine Sanctuary System. So fast forward, we had not a long public process, a multi-year public process. And we, with some beginning scoping meetings, and we got some ideas of what people wanted to see in a sanctuary, created a proposal. that hit the street in 2017. More public meetings and opportunities to comment followed that. And in 2020, we published the final document really to establish the sanctuary. There's then a 45-day period where the governor of Wisconsin and Congress get a chance to review it. So there's a really robust public process to create this place. And along the way, we worked hand in hand with several state agencies. You can see them mentioned there to make sure that this was going to jive in the right way with the state of Wisconsin because we're co-managed. We're equal partners in managing this marine sanctuary. And at the end of the day, in 2021, this past summer, we were officially established. And so these are the final boundaries. And again, it runs from, roughly 2 rivers to Port Washington, 36 historic shipwrecks. There's now 27 that are on the National Register of Historic Places. So really a well-demonstrated national significance here. And in October, we got together and had a small media event. Unfortunately, COVID we had to keep the reins on this. We had envisioned a much bigger public celebration, but Governor Evers, Senator Baldwin, Dr. Rick Spinrad, who's the head of NOAA, Christian Overland, the director of the Wisconsin Historical Society, mayors, and other folks from nonprofits joined us for this event. And what really came out clear is all the speakers, no matter where you were from, what community or what part of the state, you're really talking about the sanctuary as a region and connecting the communities together, expanding on opportunities for tourism and recreation and education and research. So you can think of the sanctuary as a little bit of an umbrella that's kind of connecting some of the pieces here on the lakeshore as it applies to some of the things I just mentioned. So a big vision for this place, but really connecting all of these communities together under this idea of a national marine sanctuary. Now, from a history perspective, it's incredible what is here. Roughly, we're bracketed in time from the 1830s to really the 1930s. The image in the top is a small schooner that was built in the 1830s. It's the oldest shipwreck in Wisconsin, and it is the one in the frontier period that connected Wisconsin with the rest of the eastern seaboard. That's my dog, and unfortunately, I can't mute him and not me. So. I think I'll settle down in a second. But this is, the oldest shipwreck in Wisconsin and really starts the timeline. But you can think of Wisconsin, before we're a state in 1848, this maritime world is emerging and it's an important connection. Up to 1929, this is the steamer Senator, which was carrying over 200 Nash automobiles when it sank in the sanctuary off of Port Washington in 1929. So you get this span of a small coastal trading schooner to this, marvelous and large and innovative car carrier that's really doing the business and industry of America and everything in between. So a really big and important 100-year period there. We have another nerdy saying in archaeology, which is that the ones that didn't make it tell us about the ones that did. And so, often we look at shipwrecks, it's a little counterintuitive that they often are tragic events. And there are as many as 5,000 shipwrecks across all of the Great Lakes. But there were tens of thousands of ships, and they made millions of voyages in building the nation. And so this relatively small number of shipwrecks that exist tell us about the ones that made it. They tell us about the men and the women and really the success of this amazing water highway. And they connect us to, they didn't operate just kind of on the lake and, in a vacuum. There's this huge maritime universe ashore, which many of you know about because you see this in lighthouses and other things that may be preserved in the lakeshore. But by and large, this universe of maritime activity is gone. And what it's preserved in is the shipwrecks that are now on the lake bed. So industry, travel, immigration, innovation as ships get bigger and faster and can carry more and are more specialized. All of those stories are wrapped up in the shipwrecks in the Marine Sanctuary. The lower image to the right is Manitowoc. That's the Manitowoc River in 1890. And you really get a sense of how people were living with these incredible technological marvels, right outside their their back door. And you kind of got to wonder, did they see them as technologically advanced? Did they just think they were sort of part and parcel with their day? I often wonder about that. Were they like the airliners of their day? They're sort of commonplace, but when you really think about it, you think about what an engineering marvel they really are. But there they are in the backdrop of the Manitowoc River in 1890. And the shipwrecks also connect us to these cities like Manitowoc and Sheboygan. Here's Sheboygan Harbor in 1890, also choked with schooners that are wintering there in the off season. And of course, our cities on the lakeshore are growing, and their culture and their character is emerging in a maritime context. And that's a really important part of their identity even today. If you think about commercial fishing in Two Rivers and Port Washington, or building submarines in Manitowoc, this maritime culture and heritage runs really deep. In the shipwrecks in the sanctuary, they certainly tell us about ourselves here on this stretch of the Wisconsin shoreline. But these ships are traveling and moving, and they're doing the business of the United States as it's growing. And so they tell us and connect us to places like Buffalo and Milwaukee. This is this paddle wheel steamer Niagara, which was built in the 1840s, sank in the 1850s. And this would make multiple trips a year from Buffalo to Milwaukee, carrying some packaged good, carrying travelers, but also immigrants. And so thousands of immigrants would travel through sanctuary waters on their way to Chicago or Milwaukee. This one came to a tragic end with the loss of maybe as many as 60 lives in the marine sanctuary. But its remains are there to remind us and help us explore and provide a window into the past of this amazing period in our development as in the Midwest, which is immigration and people moving into this place to start a new life here in the Midwest. And the farming and the agriculture and all of the industry that kind of springs from the people power that's moving into this region. And even places like Chicago. In 1870, Chicago was the largest lumber market in the world. And in fact, in the 1840s, Milwaukee and Chicago were the largest grain markets in the world. So there's a lot going on here, and it's made possible by the ships that are moving around the Great Lakes, and some are coming through the National Marine Sanctuary. Probably the coolest thing about all of that is that the shipwrecks provide us with a linkage to the people that did this work. The center figure here is Captain Herman Schoenemann. He was a captain of the schooner Rouse Simmons. The Rouse Simmons was a schooner that sank in the sanctuary waters off Two Rivers in 1912. But it's a pretty interesting story. I'm going to dive in here just for a few slides to dig in on one shipwreck story. Each of them has its own story. Schoenemann was born in Algoma, Wisconsin, which is known as Anape back in the 1860s, second generation immigrant, and eventually finds himself in Chicago, trying to make a life for himself and, trying to kind of move on in the world. And he owns a pub and he's in the grocery business, and eventually he's captaining schooners. And sometime after that, he gets involved in owning shares of schooners and gets into the Christmas tree trade, which is a pretty interesting aspect of Great Lakes commerce, at least here on Lake Michigan, where in November each year, schooners would travel up to the UP of Michigan and come back with thousands of Christmas trees loaded in their holds and on their decks. The Rouse Simmons was a kind of a particularly well-known ship, as it would dock in Chicago at the Clark Street Bridge. In fact, you can still see a plaque there today that commemorates the schooner Rouse Simmons. But it would sail into the river, and people would know that it's coming and gather around it. The story is that Captain Schoenemann, he was known as Captain Santa, will kind of give away some of these trees, maybe make a few dollars on some of the others. But he's a fixture there on the Chicago lakeshore. It's not an easy job, and they're doing this work in November. And in fact, his brother August in 1890 dies in a shipwreck just off Chicago with a load of Christmas trees coming in for the season. And so, Schoenemann is a good example of kind of a, we think of him as untypical because this is, a really special story, an interesting one. But it's not really untypical for a life aboard a schooner. Dangerous, hard work. And, the existence of the Rouse Simmons today, this, because it still exists on the lake bed, kind of gives us a snapshot into that world. Well, the Christmas tree ship in 1912, it's aging now. It was built in the 1860s, so it gives you a sense of how they're trying to really wring out every ounce of profit from this aging schooner. It's a pretty dangerous place to be. And Schoeneman's on his last trip of the year, coming down the lake, and probably has the team of wood choppers who were up there in the UP. They're getting their ride home to the bottom of Lake Michigan after the season of chopping Christmas trees. And they disappear off of Two Rivers. And in contemporary press, there was a lot of speculation about how and why, and I'll share with you in a second some of that. But in many respects, that could have been the end of the story. And maybe if we did some archival searching, we'd know a little bit about this schooner. But there's something really special about the fact that it still exists. Schoeneman's children, his daughter and his wife, actually carried on the trade. This was such an important part of Chicago culture, and important for them to continue on this tradition, that they made a few schooner loads and then later would bring train loads of Christmas trees down to the Clark Street Bridge and sell them there. And this continued on into the 1830s. And, in many ways that could have been the end of the story. But in the late 1960s, Kent Bell Richard, a local diver and wreck hunter, found the remains of the Rouse Simmons. And, that's why we know about it today. And this is even its own mini adventure. Can you imagine in the 1860s and early 1970s, looking for shipwrecks with what we would think of now as kind of primitive technology, but then was pretty cutting edge. And you're out there on this rough lake, in this case in the fall. He found this wreck in October, and you're getting a hit on your radar, on your sonar screen. And in this case, doing a dive by yourself in 170 feet of water to explore this blip on your sonar screen, and then you come across the well-preserved remains of the schooner Rouse Simmons. So finding these wrecks is also a real cultural piece of our identity here on the lakeshore and across all of the Great Lakes. So this is an important piece. The people that find these places are a big part of the story. Fast forward into the 2000s, the Wisconsin Historical Society, the amazing archaeologists there, are beginning to explore the Rouse Simmons from an archaeological perspective, putting the pieces together. How did it sink? Why did it sink? What's the real story behind the sinking of the schooner Rouse Simmons? And this is some imagery done by the Society and also Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And today, the story of the Rouse Simmons, this legacy continues. The Coast Guard Code of Mackinac will bring Christmas trees into Chicago each year, commemorating this voyage that was done by Captain Schoeneman so many years ago. And of course, it's a fantastic dive site and very popular. There's thousands of artifacts from the Rouse Simmons. Some of them are up at the Roger Street Fishing Village in Two Rivers. You got to go visit if you haven't been there. But they also exist in, private collections. The 1970s or so. These are, these are hard places to get to. And so, you might do a dive and want to share this history with the public. And that's one way to do it, is to, kind of bring these artifacts back to the surface. So there's a lot of artifacts still out there. And this is, I think, an important thing we can do together is to find a way to get these back into the public realm and conserve them. And there's lots of divers who are willing to do that now. And so that's really great. Of course, today, this is a prohibited activity in the Marine Sanctuary. All of the shipwrecks on the bottomlands in the sanctuary are owned by the state of Wisconsin. And so those artifacts as well are owned by the state of Wisconsin. And this is a good thing, as you know, this, or may know, the shipwrecks here in the bottomlands are held in trust by the state of Wisconsin for the benefit of all Wisconsinites. And in this case of the Marine Sanctuary, we can kind of amplify that to really mean the public in a much broader sense. And so there's a lot of value here to be shared with the public. And we'll kind of move on into our kind of modern period here, just checking my time. One of the things that you've probably noticed from this imagery is that shipwrecks in the Great Lakes are in amazing condition, cold, fresh water. This is, the way that they stay in really great shape compared to, say, shipwreck in an ocean environment. There's a good example of this one. It's a little bit of a cautionary tale. Actually, it's a big cautionary tale. In this top image is the schooner Alvin Clark, built in the 1840s, and was discovered in Green Bay in the 1960s. And an intrepid team of volunteers and divers got together and actually raised the ship from the lake bed and from 80 feet of water, got it to the surface, and it looked pretty much like you're seeing it there in that image. It floated and was a museum attraction for a long time. It's an incredible feat, and it's a great story. If you've seen the recent PBS documentary Shipwrecks, you'll know about this story. If you haven't seen it, Google it up and check it out. It's an amazing story. You know, unfortunately, the care of this a massive wooden artifact was a little bit beyond the kind of the scope of what these folks could pull off at the time. There's only a handful of these around the world, shipwrecks that have been raised from the seabed and preserved. It's obviously pretty expensive to do something like that. So ultimately, the Alvin Clark is deteriorates, and its remaining pieces are hauled off to a landfill. So cautionary tale. But the good news is, and this is just kind of what it was for the time. We know that shipwrecks will stay incredibly well preserved, sitting on the bottom of the lake. This other picture is the schooner Defiance, also built in the 1840s, same vintage as the Alvin Clark, but that's how it looks today. Mast still standing, and it's in about 185 feet of water in Lake Huron. So cold, fresh water gives us a real opportunity to preserve and learn, enjoy, but also leverage these places for other public benefits as well. And one of those benefits is recreation. And one of the cool things, these are all images from the Marine Sanctuary, shipwrecks within the Marine Sanctuary. And they occur in different environments. There's shallow water shipwrecks up in Two Rivers off of Raleigh Point, and Point Beach has a number of shipwrecks that are in a sandy environment, and they're kind of buried and sometimes unburied, but you can snorkel out there, you can paddleboard, you can kayak, and see these places. And so there's a real opportunity to get into the sanctuary and enjoy these shipwrecks. And then every depth going on to 450 feet of water, there's a shipwreck there. And there are folks that are really into technical diving. That's something I enjoy doing. And so there's a real market for these people that want to take that challenge and dive shipwrecks in 200 or 300 feet of water. And then there's shipwrecks for folks that are just beginning to dive. So there's really something for everyone in terms of getting into the sanctuary and interacting with this history and figuring out what it means for you. There's also infrastructure and certainly some economic development that can happen behind some of this stuff. To make that happen, to kind of facilitate that, this summer, these are images from Thunder Bay, but this summer we'll be installing shipwreck mooring buoys on some shipwrecks in the sanctuary. It's going to take us some time to get them, most or all of them, done. But the idea is to provide snorkelers or kayakers or divers with a really safe place to tie up their boat so that they don't have to use an anchor to grapple into a shipwreck and hold their place and then dive up and down that line. So a permanent mooring buoy is a really important resource protection piece, but it's also a great way to encourage people to go out and enjoy and dive these places. And then, the graphics and the science and the websites and packaging this together so that someone could get really excited about saying, hey, I want to go there and I want to do that. So that's, we'll start working on this, and it'll be a multi-year process as we put mooring buoys on each site. Not everybody's going to get into the sanctuary, and so we're underway right now with an infrastructure study and getting together with stakeholders in the communities to really look at what the sanctuary infrastructure along the lakeshore could be. How do we connect these places, and if there's potential for a visitor center or other ways for the sanctuary to kind of expand on what's going on in this area. Those are the things we want to look at. So we're dreaming big for this study that's underway right now, and there's some great partners already in this area that are weighing in and saying, hey, you know what, could we get together to do this? Or a sanctuary might be a great way for us to accomplish this element. And we're bringing partners in from outside of the sanctuary. You might recognize the Dennis Sullivan, that's Wisconsin's flagship, docked in Milwaukee. What if we can get that moving around the sanctuary and between these ports for education purposes, for for cruises and for students, working with the Badger to, they get tens of thousands of visitors coming back and forth of the Badger. So promoting the sanctuary, promoting conservation, promoting these tourism in this neck of the woods. These are all, pieces we hope to tie together and then build the infrastructure that can support the mission of the sanctuary and what some of these communities have envisioned for us. And I'll just kind of finish up here quickly with a couple of research projects that are going on right now in the sanctuary. There's research projects are a really good snapshot of how we bring different partners together to accomplish something, whether it's an education project or research project, or maybe it's some effort around tourism and recreation. This was a grant we wrote to look at shipwrecks off of Raleigh Point. Those buried shipwrecks are in a really dynamic environment, and they're really tough to pin down, and they can be tough to find. And so we wrote a grant to bring some partners in. And we brought in a couple of folks. We used autonomous platforms to go look for these shipwrecks. So these are uncrewed systems. The first one we used was a drone with a magnetometer, but essentially a fancy metal detector to look for these buried shipwrecks. And this came from the University of Miami. So, these are the folks that are experts in this kind of stuff. So we got their graduate students to come up and continue to learn about their gear, but also provide us with some data. We had a commercial firm, Marine Magnetics, provide the magnetometer. So there's a great public-private partnership and academic partnership happening that can coalesce around some of these research projects. The second leg of our expedition was using a autonomous surface vehicle with a really fancy sonar on it. And the idea was that this thing can run for days, and it does on the ocean. And we weren't able to do that here in the Great Lakes, but it can run for hours on end. And it can be much more precise than having, a person driving a boat. So this is entirely automated. And the idea was to go look for shipwrecks using this sonar. This came from a company called Ocean Infinity, who again was, really happy to play a part in this research and provided some really substantial in-kind contributions to it. And then the idea was, if you found something, well, you could take this autonomous underwater vehicle and then go get some more information on them quickly while you're in the field, just after you discover this. This sonar image to the right is the schooner Gallinipper, which is a known shipwreck here in the Marine Sanctuary. And this imagery was taken by this underwater vehicle. So you get a sense of the kind of products that this can produce. And we thought it could be really handy for long-term monitoring. This is really easy to deploy this off a small boat. It runs by itself. It's really hands-off once you program it. And in 20 minutes or so, you can get a pretty good image of a shipwreck. This one happens to be in almost 200 feet of water, just over 200 feet of water. So a pretty good piece of technology to help us kind of keep tabs on these shipwrecks and see how they're deteriorating. This one came from the University of Delaware, by the way. And their team, mostly graduate students, a few professors who I don't know, man, they, maybe drank coffee and directed the rest of these guys, but the bulk of the work was done by these incredible graduate students. And this is also a big part of bringing projects together, educating this next generation of marine scientists. And if they can do that in a marine sanctuary, and we can write a grant and provide some of the infrastructure and the impetus to get this work done, that's where we want to be. That's a really great thing. So these graduate students were pretty incredible in operating this equipment. And we took a day to invite local educators out to Two Rivers to take a look at this technology. Really, it was a chance for us to network with educators and see, how can they leverage the sanctuary? What do they see the sanctuary contributing to their work, whether it be exposing students to new technology or finding new ways to teach their curriculum. So this was a really fantastic day to get together with these teachers and figure out what they might want out of a National Marine Sanctuary. And this window into technology through the lens of the National Marine Sanctuary could be a really great way to create some impacts in the classroom. So we're looking forward to building out these programs as well, our education program. And then finally, we're underway mapping the Marine Sanctuary. And believe it or not, if you look at a NOAA chart, if you're a boater, you'll know this. A lot of the information we have on the bottom of the lake in terms of its depth and bathymetry is pretty old. Some of it was done with a lead line. Some of it was done with some pretty primitive sonars. So we hope to update this information and map the marine sanctuary with modern technology. In that image to the left, the colored areas essentially are ones that we've actually already covered. So we're underway really trying to learn about this place. Yeah, we're going to find cultural resources and maybe a shipwreck or two along the way. We're also going to learn a lot about the habitat and the lake bed type. And this is really important for bigger conservation questions that researchers and scientists will want to work on. So we're picking away at it, and we have some good news. We really do think that we're going to get a good chunk of this mapped this year with the Office of Coast Survey. That's a NOAA program that does the charting for the oceans and Great Lakes. So we're pretty excited about pulling this data and making this available to create this new understanding of Lake Michigan. We are actually able to work with our other NOAA partners to then translate this raw sonar data into information about the lake bed and the habitat. So this is kind of step 2. We haven't got this one totally figured out, but we're going to figure it out eventually. You know, we get the mapping done, and then we bring in the partners to really give us that detailed look at the lake bed so that biologists and other natural scientists can use this information for the work that they're doing. In this past summer, we also installed a few real-time wind and wave buoys in the sanctuary. We got a grant to do this. These were really easy off-the-shelf buoys that you can tie a 50-pound weight to, and you can toss them off in 100 feet of water. And they'll give you real-time wind and wave direction. They'll also give you water temperature information throughout the water column. And we wanted to do that because we thought that might be really important for fishermen, something that they can check in real time and see what's happening with temperature in the water column, help them target fish. And of course, there's a real public safety aspect to knowing exactly what's going on in the lake before you set sail or go diving or fishing or do any kind of boating. These were really popular. We had something like 40,000 individual hits on these websites with about 7,000 unique users. So we know they're popular. We know there's a demand for this kind of information. And in the future, we hope to build these out with even bigger, more robust buoys that can help us do more environmental sensing and monitoring. And this is my last slide here. The final thing we're working on, we have a bunch of other things going on, but really a key part is putting together our advisory council for the marine sanctuary. And this is a council that provides recommendations to manage and steer the sanctuary. It's made up of folks from the community. There's 15 seats, and each seat has a little bit different role. We have folks from economic development and maritime industry, maritime heritage, archaeology, citizens at large. And so they will help inform the sanctuary and help also be ambassadors into the community. So stand by, we're putting this together now and hope to do a recruiting announcement here over the next few months. And that is indeed the last slide I've got. So I really appreciate an opportunity to share this with you, and I'm definitely happy to take any questions.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Russ. We do have a question here right away. Let's see, someone comments that on an earlier slide, there seemed to be something about a proposed marine sanctuary for Lake Ontario. So what are the cultural conservation goals for that particular site?
Yeah, that's right. There is, it runs similar to the ones in Wisconsin in terms of what the communities are looking for in that marine sanctuary. From a kind of a straight up conservation perspective, it's definitely history and maritime preservation. It's that narrow lane of cultural resources, but the history there is so much earlier than the history here in the Western Great Lakes. So you have shipwrecks from the late 1700s. The HMS Ontario has been found in that neck of the woods. That's a British warship from the late 1700s. So this is really the cradle of the beginning of the westward movement of people and technology. So there's a great story there, but the goals are very similar to the one in Wisconsin.
Another question. Moira says, Russ, I think you like to dive. Do you have a favorite shipwreck within the sanctuary?
Well, yeah, I have the lamest excuse to this, which is they're all interesting, right? And they all have their own stories to tell, and they're all pretty amazing. I have dived a few. I actually worked for the state of Wisconsin almost 20 years ago and did a lot of diving then. and still diving. So I hope to get out and visit every shipwreck here as we get going. But the Rouse Simmons is a pretty incredible dive to make, just because of the history and the fact that it's so well preserved.
Mhm. Let's see, somebody is asking or comments that it was very interesting and wondering if this recording will be posted and available. And the answer to that question is yes. It will take us a little time because we'll have this caption, but we'll put this on the YouTube channel for Wisconsin Sea Grant. So if you follow us, I would recommend following us on Facebook and Twitter, because when talks like this are available, we'll announce it there. And we have other talks in this Lake Talk series on our YouTube channel, including one from last fall. That was another shipwreck talk that people may be interested in if they like this topic. The other topic covers different ground, so it's a good complement. Last fall, we had Caitlin Zant from the Wisconsin Historical Society, and she's a maritime archaeologist there. So that's a good one to watch if you're interested in these talks. But yes, we will definitely get Russ's talk added to our collection on YouTube. I'm seeing some more questions coming in chat, so let me just take a look there. Let's see, Jordan asks, is there a potential for further wrecks outside of those that are already known in the marine sanctuary?
Yeah, there are. There are as many as 700 shipwrecks in Wisconsin waters, and there's a good number known in Lake Michigan. I think, the last time I checked in with one of my favorite historians, they were estimating as many as 1,000 shipwrecks in Lake Michigan. So there are many known shipwrecks outside the marine sanctuary boundaries. There's some great ones off in Milwaukee and up in Door County for sure, but there's definitely potential to find more. We have an estimate of maybe as many as 60 yet to be discovered in the marine sanctuary, but certainly more to be discovered.
Margie comments, great, thank you. So there's appreciation here for your talk. People have enjoyed this. Keep those questions coming if you like. In the meantime, I'll ask one of my own. This is such an interesting field, and I think sometimes it's a field that people have never even heard about or thought of. It's such a unique niche within archaeology, and I'm just curious, how did you first become interested in maritime archaeology?
Yeah, it is unique, and it's hard to explain to your parents when you want to get into marine archaeology, right? It was kind of I was interested in history, but I had started off in a whole different career, but kind of in my late 20s, got really interested in history. I went to do a graduate degree, and somebody said, hey, did you know there's this whole field of underwater archaeology? And I just thought that sounded really hands-on and something I'd be interested in. So went and did a degree there. Then shortly after, started working with the Wisconsin Historical Society as an archaeologist. And when you're out of grad school, you're all about the diving and documenting the shipwreck and the operations that go with that. It's pretty fun stuff, and it's fascinating, and it's really interesting to do. But then as we work through the Historical Society, you begin to realize that there's all these other benefits to shipwrecks and the education and the public engagement that surrounds them. So that's, for me, has become just as important as the diving, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was also going to ask you if you have any favorite books you can recommend on the topic of Great Lakes shipwrecks or just shipwrecks in general. Are there particular things you would recommend to people?
Yeah, there's a great one now out by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. It's called Shipwrecks, Tales from the Wreckage, Stories from the Wreckage. So you can Google that up. You find that on Amazon as well. There's another great one. It's called Death and Life of the Great Lakes. And it's much more comprehensive, and it talks more about the ecology of the Great Lakes and some of the challenges. That was by Dan Egan. So you can Google that up too. Highly recommend that one. That's a great snapshot of what's going on in the Great Lakes.
Other things I might add to, in your talk, you had mentioned the recent PBS Wisconsin program that's just called Shipwrecks. And I did a little checking while you were talking. People can actually watch it online too. So if people want to watch that, you can just go to pbswisconsin.org and watch that Shipwrecks program. Also, another thing people might want to know about is the wisconsinshipwrecks.org website. That was developed a few years ago between Sea Grant and the Wisconsin Historical Society. That's kind of an interesting resource because you can look things up by the name of a ship. You can search by date. You can see maps of locations. That's a pretty rich resource to find out about specific shipwrecks. Let's see, are there any other resources you would recommend?
No,
People
that
are
was
out
one
there.
that's the one that comes to top of mind,
Okay,
shipwrecks.org.
sure,
Yeah, for
sure.
wisconsinshipwrecks.org. Yeah.
Let's see, I'm just looking at the chat. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. Are there other things that you wanted to mention, Russ?
No, that's great.
Other,
Just really appreciate the opportunity and getting a chance to answer a few questions. So, we're easy to find. We do have a website for the shipwreck sanctuary. So, Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast Sanctuary, you'll find us. And, if anyone, particularly educators and researchers or folks that are out there that, have a way that they think they might want to leverage the sanctuary or partner with us, we're definitely always encourage folks to just reach out and pitch any idea you got. We'd love to work with anyone.
yeah, I think that's so nice to hear because it really is still an evolving thing. I mean, it took all this effort and time to get the designation, but still, in a way, that's just the beginning of the next phase of people being able to engage with this and learn from it and interact with it. And oops, I think we may have a question in here. Let's see. Any estimation on the number of visitors who might come to the sanctuary each year?
That's a good question. Hard to say. So what we do want to do is get a baseline. So we're trying to figure out a way to get some socioeconomic baseline analysis done. We had started this during the designation, but it tailed off for a variety of reasons. But the long story short is we'd like to figure out what the baseline is so that we can measure the impact going forward. In Thunder Bay, in the Marine Sanctuary in Michigan, we have a sense of what can happen. It's a completely different kind of geography for that town. It's about 4 hours north of Detroit. But in that case, we were able to build a visitor center in partnership with a local developer and over time create exhibitry. And so that facility now sees about 80,000 visitors a year that'll travel up there to do that. There's also a glass bottom boat. And so, how that relates to Wisconsin, we'll see, but we do know that if we do it right, we can be a attractor for visitors. So we'd like to get a sense on what the visitation is now, and then as we build out elements, measure it going forward. So we have a good metric on that.
We've got just a comment here from Phil saying, thanks, Russ. More appreciation for your great presentation. Oh, there is a new question here. Jordan asks, is it possible to go into detail about the challenges it took for Wisconsin finally getting its marine sanctuary?
Yeah, I guess the easy way to put it, or the short way to put it is, some of the challenges I think were, listening to the public and being able to figure out how to address concerns. One of the chief ones was, and this is really understandable, what does a marine sanctuary mean to me if I'm a lakeshore property owner, right? So I may have this National Marine Sanctuary butting up against my lakeshore where I have some exclusive riparian rights. So this idea of what the sanctuary could do, we really tried to be really proactive in getting the information out there that, this doesn't become federal lands. It doesn't change state law. It doesn't change riparian rights and those type of things. But in the end, those concerns were pretty serious. So we actually moved the boundary of the marine sanctuary from the ordinary high water mark to the low water datum, which is kind of a wonky technical thing. But think of it as basically moving the marine sanctuary boundary lower into the water, away from a riparian owner's kind of demarcation. So, was an important thing to do. It was a good adjustment. And I think it takes time to do those things, so that, add a little bit of delay, but in the end, it's part of the public process and the way these things work and how they shape up.
Oh, great. If we don't have any other questions, I think we'll call it a night, but I wanted to thank you so much for your time, Russ. This was really, really informative. So we're really glad that you were able to do this tonight and give us an overview of the sanctuary and all the things that are attached to that.
You bet. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right. And thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight, and keep your eye on our Facebook and Twitter accounts, and we'll let you know when this recording is available. So thanks again, everyone. Good night.
Night.